Welcome back to another episode of the Hydrocarbon Engineering Podcast. I'm your host, Callum O'Reilly, and today we'll be exploring the evolving digital landscape in the energy sector with the help of Faiz, Head of Digital Energy at DNV. We'll dive into the current state of digitalisation, the key drivers behind transformation, and how companies can move from pilot projects to full-scale deployment of AI and digital tools. From the role of digital twins to building trust in AI and navigating new workforce demands, this conversation is packed with insights. So, let's get into it.
The Hydrocarbon Engineering Podcast is brought to you by Owens Corning Foam Glass Insulation. From managing vapor drive and mitigating corrosion risk, to maintaining thermal performance and supporting safety on the job site, the insulating system plays a critical role in high-performing hydrocarbon processing facilities. Learn more about how foam glass insulation contributes to the design of high-performing insulating systems at cryogenic facilities at www.owenscorning.com/foamglasslng study. That's www.owenscorning.com/FOAMGLASLNG study.
Hi Graham, thanks so much for joining us today. How are things with you?
Yeah, really good. Thanks very much, Callum, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast today.
No, it's a pleasure, Graham. Really pleased that you could join us. So before we get diving into the questions regarding digitalization, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your role at DNV.
Of course, no problem at all, Callum. So yeah, by way of introduction, my name is Faiz. So I head up the digital energy team here in DNV's UK and Ireland region, which is a team of around 20 people comprised of engineers, consultants and data scientists. So personally speaking, I'm a chartered engineer who's been with DNV for around 11 years, working across a number of our business units, but always at the intersection of energy and digital and technology.
Great. Thank you for that, Graham. So to get us started today, I was wondering if you could describe for us the current state of digitalization in the energy sector, and where do you think the industry currently stands in terms of digital maturity?
Yeah, it's a really good question to kick us off, Callum. From my perspective, and certainly from the perspective of DNV, our work with the energy industry more broadly really tells us that the sector is starting to invest significant amounts of money into digital technologies. And of course, that's inclusive of artificial intelligence-based technologies. But I think according to the detail in our latest DNV research, few can really demonstrate the trustworthiness of these technologies to stakeholders to support critical decision-making. To bring that to life a little bit, what seems to be a struggle for most companies is to get from piloting through innovation projects or in a lab to actual project and business as usual implementation. So for example, only 12% of the industry's C-level execs that certainly we interact with and we speak with on a regular basis say that they are in an advanced stage of digital technology or AI development. So trust is key. I think trust in digital technologies to support safety critical decision-making is generally lacking. And certainly in general terms, we see that some of the underlying barriers to establishing trust in digital technologies to really allow the value of those technologies to be realized in the sector is cost of the technologies themselves, culture, so typically resistance to change. We see a general lack of digital skills and capability. We see a lack of investment in next generation digital technologies. And I think last but by no means least, we still hear many concerns about cybersecurity.
Really interesting, Graham. Thank you for that. I want to come back to a couple of the points that you mentioned there, in particular, trust surrounding digitalization and AI later on in our conversation. But before then, what do you see as the biggest drivers behind digital transformation in the sector?
Yeah, that's another great question, Callum. We firmly believe that a digital transformation is really key to safeguarding energy supply and energy systems in their current form, whilst at the same time allowing our society and the sector to decarbonize and electrify. So we really expect that we're moving towards an energy system in a sector more broadly that consists or will consist of connected digital systems such as digital twins, very much with artificial intelligence baked into the heart of smart cyber physical infrastructure. So In a way, I'd summarize that by saying it's a case of the 3Ds, so decarbonisation and decentralisation enabled by digitalisation. From DNV's perspective, a timely and effective energy transition is going to be really difficult with automation, without data-driven decision-making, and digital innovations more generally. And we really believe that a complete transformation of the sector really requires data that is going to be available and usable and can ultimately be trusted to allow those future systems and those future technologies to be built and deployed. So, well, what does that mean? That's going to require data across the sector to first be identified and made accessible. It's going to need to be transformed, and ultimately it's going to need to be well governed and well managed. So what we'll see is a sector that's going to move from an area where data is gathered, managed and used for a very specific purpose to one where data is truly treated and realised as a new type of asset. And for us, that's going to be needed to enable the management of things like future system complexity, which is really going to fundamentally change the approach to the management of data, both historic and new, across the sector more generally.
So are you seeing a shift from pilot projects to full-scale deployment of digital tools and AI across energy facilities?
Yeah, I'm going to generalise a little bit, Callum, by saying no. Actually, we're not, and certainly not yet, anyway. And at risk of sounding negative, I'll try to put a positive spin on that response. I mentioned digital trust earlier. So for us, establishing trust in digital systems is going to be really vital for the energy industry, which manages high-risk assets and critical infrastructure that are essential for all of society. Whilst digital technologies offer significant value opportunities or opportunities to create value for the sector, they also introduce complexity and risk. So some examples that we see: an efficient energy transition. So as the sector transitions towards cleaner and smarter technologies, trust in the underlying systems is going to be required to ensure the seamless integration of these digital innovations into the energy sector more broadly. And trustworthy systems will enable efficient energy production, efficient energy distribution, and of course, ultimately, efficient energy consumption. So trust in systems will enable an efficient and a just energy transition. And that leads me to my second point, which is around smart energy adoption. So what do we mean by that? Well, with the proliferation of smart energy technologies such as smart grids and sensors and Internet of Things devices, maintaining the trust, if you like, between those connected systems is going to become paramount. So trustworthy data and trustworthy connected systems are going to be fundamental for reliable decision making. And then the third point, and I've already touched on it, data. So data management, we need to see effective data handling. We're going to see data that can be very much be trusted because actually the provenance of the data sources themselves are deemed to be reliable. They're deemed to be safe. They're deemed to be secure, and they're deemed to be trustworthy. And that's going to be needed for the seamless exchange of information to happen, which is going to be critical to support the optimization of the operation of the future system. Security, again, we've touched upon it, cybersecurity. So trustworthy operational technology will really help us safeguard against the ever-increasing threat of cyber attacks and cyber activities. So robust security measures are going to be needed to protect critical infrastructure from breaches, to ensure that we have an uninterrupted energy supply. And then my final point, regulatory compliance. So trustworthy systems are really needed to adhere to future industry regulation and standards that will be introduced to effectively safeguard both against the technology and to ensure the safe operation of these technologies. And I think compliance with such regulation will be confidence among stakeholders and investors to ensure that the system of the future can operate safely, securely and reliably. So for us, ultimately, in summary, the trust in digital technologies enabled through digital trust will really underpin a reliable and resilient energy system, and that will support a sustainable, just energy transition.
So Graham, how do you recommend that companies prioritize their digital investments? What delivers the fastest or most meaningful return on investment?
Yeah, good question, Callum. I'll briefly and perhaps very specifically highlight three of DNV's learnings from working with customers in the energy sector on projects across all of the vectors that we're supporting. I mean, firstly, there needs to be a better understanding of how technology will provide value in a very specific context. Now, for example, AI technology in particular needs to be integrated into work processes to be sustainable. So process change and really managing the change processes associated with the introduction of digital tech, including AI, is going to be really, really important. And I think that absolutely needs to be very high on the agenda for many organizations looking to actually implement a digital transformation. So not so much test what those transformative technologies might be in a lab, but absolutely think very carefully about the process change that's required to embed and deploy them. Secondly, and I've touched upon change management, but digital assets themselves that are ultimately required and put into business as usual, they're going to require structured change management approaches. So throughout any digitalisation process, we'd really like to see that very much at the forefront too. So how is one going to manage, support, sustain, upgrade, and continue to operate the assets that are embedded at the heart of our system? And again, I've touched on it a lot, but it is a recurring theme, data management, data quality. So we're going to need to see more comprehensive approaches to how data is managed. And that's going to be needed to leverage new technologies such as digital twins, because those digital assets ultimately have different assurance and compliance requirements compared to physical assets, certainly, mainly because they are always changing. So for many organisations in the sector, all three of those items remain key challenges today, and that's going to need to be resolved to ensure a more meaningful return on investment moving forward.
And how is DNV helping energy operators use digital technologies to improve areas such as safety and reduce unplanned downtime?
Yeah, I'm going to continue to build upon the digital trust thing because I think it's really important. So from our perspective, that's established and sustained through a series of rigorous assessments. So in our case, that's aligned with our recommended practices. And these are assessments typically identify potential gaps that need to be addressed to meet regulatory or general trust requirements within the organisation or the sector more broadly across the entire digital value chain. So that could span from sensor data collection to supporting decision-making, ultimately through to digital twinning or full-blown digital twinning more broadly. So digital trust, I think, hinges on three critical factors. So reliable results. So firstly, ensuring that the underlying digital technology consistently produces accurate and dependable outcomes. The sector needs that to ensure a safe and sustainable operating environment. Secondly, user confidence, so really building the confidence of engineers and operators and asset management teams, for example, by demonstrating transparency, security and reliability in the processes and systems that are managed by these future digital systems. And then finally, we talked about our ROI earlier, but business value, of course, a real headline here. So validating that the solution not only meets technical requirements, but also delivers tangible business value, or often financial value. That's clearly a key aspect. And we think that by addressing those aspects, organizations can start to build this culture and foster that culture of digital trust, ultimately enabling the successful adoption and utilization of that tech.
So Graham, you mentioned digital twins, and I was wondering what role these play in energy facilities and how widely they're being adopted.
Yeah, I think it's time to cite an example, Callum, in my response. And I'm going to refer to the Nyhamna processing facility in Norway. And I'm certainly aware that in October 2019, I think it was, Norske Shell initiated a project to operationalize what they call an asset of the future. And that was through a partnership development of what was ultimately called the Nyhamna Dynamic Digital Twin, I believe. And that twin was developed in less than 100 days. And certainly since January 2020, they claim that the Nyhamna Digital Twin has been in operation and evolving continuously through things like monthly product releases, which focus on safe, effective, integrated work processes to support the optimization of energy production and energy use. And certainly, Norske Shell claim that the digital twin is really transforming their ways of working to unlock value and increase resilience in a changing business landscape, ever-changing landscape. Certainly, the digitalized version of that asset potentially provides the capability to simulate scenarios, for example, to help them uncover new options for the optimization of the real-life counterparts, so the real plant, ultimately with the aim of reducing overall operating costs. And I think that's a really great example, caveated by the fact that I wouldn't necessarily say that digital twin adoption is widespread. So there are positive use cases. I've cited one that's emerging across the sector and within our industry, and no doubt I'll get the opportunity to cite a few more later in the interview.
Great, thanks, Graham. So I wanted to turn now to AI, and you mentioned that digital twins aren't widely adopted in the sector at the moment, but I noticed in DNV's recent Energy Industry Insights 2025 report that 60% of respondents suggest that they will use AI-driven applications in their operations. So are you able to share any examples of how AI is being used to enhance operations and maybe talk us through the potential that AI has within the sector?
Yeah, certainly, Callum, and that's a number that continues to increase each and every year that we conduct that Energy Industry Insights survey. If I look at the adoption or the application, perhaps more specifically, of AI across the energy sector, if I take offshore oil and gas, so AI can be and is being applied to oil and gas production. It's not the exclusive preserve of clean technologies and renewables, as is sometimes suggested. Renewables, of course, tends to be technology-led, and data learning and algorithms from, say, one energy production site tends to be more applicable to another. And certainly that example does apply more weakly across extractive oil and gas production sites, for example, where you tend to have more unique geological formations. But I think it is important to summarize that AI is not new to the sector. I think it's just that we're now at an inflection point for the large-scale adoption of AI into the operating environments and the operating ecosystems of energy systems, so networks, facilities, and producers. One of the challenges, and I think one admission from our side, is that it can be really difficult for us to tease apart the impact of investment by energy companies in more general digitalization versus more specific investment in AI. Certainly for us, the hype surrounding AI at present relates mainly to generative AI and more specifically large language models. Certainly the applicability of Gen AI to energy is typically limited to low-risk applications like productivity-enhancing tools for staff through co-pilots, and certainly some really fantastic experimental work that we're seeing, for example. But I think in reality, much of the AI that is applicable to energy systems is not so much generative or won't be generative, but certainly the more familiar and perhaps more established discriminative AI, as it's called. But this is a fast-moving area, and we're certainly keeping a really close eye on developments in this space.
Thanks, Graham. So AI, obviously enormous potential, but I wanted to come back to something that you mentioned earlier where you keep referring to trust and the vital importance of it within the sector. And trust in AI systems will obviously be key, especially in safety critical industries such as ours. So how do you build confidence in AI-driven decisions?
AI is really at the forefront of most of the work that DNV is doing in the digital trust space. And there are significant opportunities for the energy sector to really adopt a digital mindset, to really ensure that these AI developments ultimately become successful deployments, successful AI deployments. Certainly artificial intelligence and other digital tools can really accelerate the energy transition. We've touched upon that already. From our side, the headline is absolutely about gaining trust of the sector, as you've already stated. So for DNV, creating a smarter energy sector that's very much embracing and utilizing technologies such as AI is going to really rely on achieving digital trust. I mentioned recommended practices earlier, but I think robust governance frameworks that can provide guidance for the procurement, the development and operation of AI and digital tech are going to be key. So our RPs, for example, are used by us as a basis for the delivery of our digital trust services. So that includes guidance on how to successfully build, deploy and operate a digital twin, how to bake in and embed a best practice approach to the management of data through good data quality, and how ultimately to ensure that AI-enabled systems can be trusted. On that last point, we're super proud, in fact, actually, that the UK government recognises the value of our work in this space and has specifically highlighted DNV's latest recommended practice, DNV RP 0671, as a real headline use case in this space. Safe, sustainable, trustworthy AI that's assured, that can be trusted. Super key for the sector moving forward. And we're starting to see some really exciting activities happen in this space, but of course, it is a long game.
So are standards and regulations keeping pace with the rapid evolution of AI and digital tools in the energy sector, Graham?
Yeah, hard to comment on because, of course, it's so different and fragmented across the globe. And we are starting to see some direction towards future legislation with, for example, the EU AI Act and the need to achieve compliance, for example. But that's still at a relatively early stage. As I've mentioned, approaches are certainly not consistent globally. And we're keeping a very close eye on what happens in some of our key operating locations. And as I sit in the UK, certainly what happens here in the UK, where we've seen various consultations and updates on potential approaches issued by the UK government's Responsible Technology Adoption Unit. And again, to labour a point almost, there is a trust gap that's going to be created by technology outpacing regulation and therefore general acceptance. Although I think it is fantastic we are seeing a willingness by the sector to try to experiment with these technologies, and mostly through innovation projects, I think it's fair to say. But that's great, but that's obviously significantly different from actually having a solution that's baked into a safety critical system. So plenty of activity, no doubt, will happen in the regulatory space over the coming years. And it will be really interesting, I think, to observe how the sector approaches and responds to that.
So what does all this mean for the workforce, Graham? Are new skills in demand?
Yeah, this is something that's quite close to my heart, really, to be honest, Callum, as we ourselves at DNV are building capability in this very specific area here within the UK and, of course, more broadly and globally. I think the inherent complexity of both the energy system and AI is really forcing organisations to focus on building a foundation of cross-domain knowledge before tackling some of the key challenges that we've spoken about today. It's not necessarily a difficult task, but it really requires time commitment and also great communications. And I'll unpack what I mean by that. So we see many businesses across the sector trying to build a talent pipeline that can feed digital know-how into the energy industry. We know that there's a technical knowledge gap. We know there's a skills gap. But the sector does have a lot of experts, domain experts as we call them, but we don't necessarily have a huge amount of people who are going into energy specifically to take data science and AI jobs. So there's a bit of a gap there. The attractiveness, if you like, of the sector needs to continue to evolve. It is evolving. I think there's some really fantastic stuff happening in that space, and we are seeing folks move into the sector from other industries, but there's still work to do. There's also the related cultural and educational barriers. So certainly at a senior leadership level, actual decision makers, I think, need to continue to enforce and build and enforce their understanding, or have enough awareness and gain sufficient technical knowledge to visualize how AI and digital tech should be and can be used within their business or on their facility. There's a risk that a potential lack of awareness and understanding can lead to a general lack of understanding of what AI and digital tech can actually do in the sector and for those organizations more broadly. So that will ultimately mean the benefits won't be realized and financial synergies will not materialize. And that could also potentially lead to a lack of investment in the sector and certainly that return on investment piece that I mentioned earlier. So I think skills at an all operational level, but also at a leadership level. I'll finish maybe by citing a really positive example. It's fantastic to see certain communities such as Digital Twin Hub in the UK run a Digital Twins for Senior Leaders course in collaboration with the leading university. And we certainly need many more initiatives like that to really continue to stimulate and attract new talent into the sector.
So Graham, perhaps a final thought today. And I was wondering if you could offer one piece of advice to leaders in the energy sector that are looking to accelerate their digital journey, what would it be?
I would say be inspired by use cases that are emerging from across the entire sector. So there is some really great stuff happening out there. And again, I sit in the UK, so the examples I'm about to cite are from here. But certainly here alone, there are some really high-profile projects emerging, including the National Energy System Operators Virtual Energy System of connected digital twins and data sharing infrastructure. At our own Spade Adam test site, we have National Gas's Future Grid Digital Twin, really a flagship activity that is inspiring so many. And we have SGN's Intelligent Gas Grid project that's using machine learning to automate some seasonably affected elements of the gas distribution network. So, that's not downstream, that's not a specific sector, that's from a different part of our system more broadly. And I think that's important, right? So look outside of your sector, look outside of your vector, be inspired by other activities and other projects that are starting to take flight. There is some good stuff happening. I think it's looking at those activities and looking for the applicability of some of the key learning outcomes from that projects and looking at how they can be applied in your area of the sector that you work in. And I think they can be used ultimately to inspire and motivate.
Great. Thanks, Graham. Really appreciate your time and expertise on this fast changing and really fascinating area of the industry. Lots to take away and lots to think about. So thank you again.
Thanks very much, Callum.
That brings us to the end of today's conversation with DNV. We've explored how digitalisation is reshaping operations in energy, from improving safety and reducing downtime to unlocking new value through AI and digital twin. As the sector moves towards greater digital maturity, it's clear that success will depend not only on smart investment, but on trust, standards, and a skilled workforce. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe for more conversations on the future of energy.
The Hydrocarbon Engineering Podcast is brought to you by Owens Corning Foam Glass Insulation. From managing vapor drive and mitigating corrosion risk, to maintaining thermal performance and supporting safety on the job site, the insulating system plays a critical role in high-performing hydrocarbon processing facilities. Learn more about how foam glass insulation contributes to the design of high-performing insulating systems at cryogenic facilities at www.owenscorning.com/foamglasslng study. That's www.owenscorning.com/FOAMGLASLNG study.